All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, on the line, I got my old buddy Mike Swanson from wallstreetwindow.com and author of The War State and also Why the Vietnam War. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Mike?
Oh, it's great to talk to you today, Scott.
Really good to talk to you again, man. Hey, so I get your emails in my email here, and this one really caught my eye. U.S. debt to GDP grows in first quarter, on track to hit danger level. And then you say you read this book by this guy, and he does this survey of history and says there's sort of a magic number when your debt to GDP ratio gets too dang high, and that we're close to that. Is that really true? And what does that really mean for the average goofball like me?
Well, let me back up a little bit. In 2008, everything crashed, and we've gone through a bunch of downturns in the past, the 2000 bust and so forth. And in 2008, a book came out called This Time is Different. And that's refers to a phrase that people that get caught up in these stock market bubbles, they always say, oh, the internet stocks aren't a bubble. This time's different. When there's people saying it's dangerous. And what that book did was it surveyed 800 years of financial history, and it focused on something called the current account deficit, which is the amount of money going out of a country in order to finance its debt, government debt, or its trade deficit. And in the 2000s, the U.S. current account deficit got over 5%. And this book and its survey shows that whenever a country's current account deficit gets over 5%, there's a financial crisis, and it happened in 2008. Now, most of the examples that book had, and this is written by, some PhD economists, most of the examples that crop up are third world countries. Argentina around 2000, Turkey, I wouldn't say it's a third world country, but Turkey's been going through this the past couple of years. It's going on in Argentina now. And typically what happens is the currency in a country goes down quite a bit, inflation explodes, and this works off the debt. Now in the United States, 2008, that didn't happen. We had a banking crisis, and the Fed and the government did all kinds of things in response. And really, I would argue, we're still living with a lot of the effects of that. So keep that 5% number in mind. It's now, that number's at 3%. Now, to get more specific, what you're referring to, the debt to GDP number. So that's the U.S. federal government debt divided by the gross domestic product. And typically this current account deficit and this debt to GDP are linked together. They kind of both become problems at the same time. Well, the other book that I referred to in my email, which is the one I really recommend people look at now, is called The Big Debt Crises. It's by Ray Dalio. It's got a lot of press in the past couple of years. And he's a billionaire, or retired billionaire, hedge fund manager. But anyway, what he shows in his book, doing a similar study of looking at not 800 years of financial history in his case, but really the past 100, is that when the debt to GDP in a country, really, the number is really 140%. It's a crisis happens, and typically it lasts a couple years. And same thing, the currency falls, inflation goes up, the economy is really crappy, and so forth. But looking at his charts, the data more closely, it looks to me like, the crisis is like when it hits 140, and then it'll reach a peak 100, somewhere between 150 and 200, and then reverse. But it looks like once it gets to 130%, that's when signs of it coming that it's about to be a problem start to crop up in the financial markets. So I'm real interested in that 130% level, because that's what I write about and kind of now do or have done for a living, is trade these crazy markets. And right now it's at 122.76%, and it's growing at a rate where it'll get to that 130% by you see the third quarter of 2026, about 2 years from now, let's say. Now, if there's a recession, that would happen quicker, because the government would most likely get fewer tax receipts, and there's a good chance that they'll do more stimulus spending as they've done the past couple of years. And this whole thing about the size of the debt, it's been exploding over the past couple of years. It's, we've been hearing about it's going to be a problem all our lives, but since 2020, it's really gone up, and it's so big now that the interest on the debt is almost triple. It's a little over double what it was in before 2020.
And how much is that?
Close to $1 trillion. That's
amazing.
Yeah, it's over $1 trillion actually. And
like, you would think if it wasn't for all the other horrible things going on, doesn't that sound like the scandal of the century right there? That of all the, like, how much do they bring in direct IRS tax revenue from the American people every year?
Oh, I can find it really quick.
Can you?
It's a lot.
Still $1 trillion of however much it is.
5 trillion.
5 trillion.
5 trillion.
So fully a fifth of that then is just going to pay interest to bondholders.
Right. And it's more, it's now bigger than Social Security. It's almost as bigger than the defense, close to the defense budget. Yeah. So,
and mostly that's going to pay. Who are the bondholders? That's mom and pop, or that's foreign central banks, or what?
Both. Most of it's in the United States. The Federal Reserve holds a lot of it.
How do you like that? People being taxed to pay interest to the Fed in what's just a bookkeeping trick, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's real money that we got to pay them. How much do we pay on interest just to the Fed?
Oh, it's a lot. I'm not sure the number off the top of my head, but the thing about
I hate the government so much.
Oh, well, what I was taught, when I went to college, in the late 90s, I'm not saying I agree with this, but I was taught that Keynesianism was great, I was taught that the policy of Keynes became adopted in the United States in the 1930s because of the Great Depression. And the idea was that you would do deficit spending when there's recession and bad times to help the economy. And then when the good times are here, you would stop and cut, you wouldn't do this deficit spending anymore. Well, that's not what's been happening in most of our lives.
Right. In other words,
it's crazy.
In other words, Keynes is Mises compared to the current deal, which is just always stimulate and never stop.
Yeah. And, we're at a point now where everyone knows we have a lot of inflation. We've seen it. You go to the grocery store and everything else, the rents, and it's exploded since 2020. It really took off in 2021 and 2022. It's obviously not going up as much every week or every month as it was during that period of time.
But it certainly ain't going back down again, right? Prices are never going to be where they were. It's only a ratchet, right?
Dropping. And 2 years ago, the Federal Reserve said it was going to raise interest rates and to stop inflation and make it come down. Their numbers are, it's currently the CPI, Consumer Price Index, annualizes officially as of today 3.1%. It was over 9% 2 years ago. And the Federal Reserve's official goal is to get it to 2%. Well, 2 years ago, when they started to raise interest rates, Chairman Jerome Powell said, this is a serious problem. And look, it's what's probably the one factor that's killed Biden's poll numbers over the past couple of years. Forget about the past couple of weeks, what's going on with him, but it's what's hurt him coming into this year. And so they know it's a political problem.
Right.
And Powell is saying, look, basically, we got to stop inflation. So I got to raise interest rates. And even if it means recession, I got to keep them up.
Election.
I got to keep them up. And now, this week on Tuesday, he spoke to Congress and he talked about lowering interest rates. So he set the stage to lower rates. He said he's worried that the rates may be too high. And so, he hasn't even achieved the 2% goal yet of getting the CPI to 2%. And they're already wanting to lower rates, and the stock market has made an all-time new high this week.
Mike,
it's crazy.
Is that just about the election? They just have to make sure that it doesn't crash before November, right?
I suspect it is. And there's two reasons why. One, with all this turmoil around Biden, I'm reading, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and various, mainstream political websites, and one of them, the stories are basically he's got a couple people really that are his close advisors for years that are, almost got him in a cocoon. And one of the stories was saying that this was an Axios, that these Biden folks are contacting this reporter and telling him stuff, and they feel good to talk to this reporter because they're not calling for Biden to, that website's not calling for Biden to do anything. They're just reporting the news. And in this story, it said, this was last week, this is Biden's plan to win. He's going to give appearances on TV and interviews. He's going to debate Trump again and do this and do that. And the last sentence was, and the economy is good, and we might be able to get an interest rate cut before the end of the year, before the election. So it's like, well, there you are. And now I went and looked at the 70s. In my mind, when it comes to so far the environment we're in, I think you want to look for historical comparisons. I think the 70s is probably a way to understand it because you have a lot of inflation, sluggish economic growth, and some sort of debt problem that will most likely get worked off in time. So in the 70s, this sort of debt crisis thing happened then. Over the entire decade, the dollar fell in value in half, and inflation was very high. And I think it doesn't have to mean everything's going to crash necessarily, like in third world country here, if once the debt to GDP gets to 140%. But if you look at interestingly enough, if you look at the time period from 1965 to 1980, and what the stock market did, it didn't really do anything overall over that great period of time, finished about even. But there are all these little bull and bear markets that would last 2 or 3 years. And the funny thing is that the best years in the stock market during those years were election years, just like this year. And the bull market would top out either within days or 10 months after each election. So yeah. I think that's kind of interesting,
There was a famous quote of Arthur Burns, the Fed chairman, saying, look, I can't make a bad political decision now, that would threaten the Fed's independence.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the argument that when people talk about this, they'll there are people I've talked to, they'll say something like, "Well, yeah, it's political, but it's not about Biden. It's not about the Democrats.
Oh,
It's
sure.
that the Fed doesn't want bad things to happen before the election to get blamed for it." I'm like, "Okay, sure."
Uh-huh. And and of course, that's the whole excuse for allowing them to have this Federal Reserve System at all in the first place is, well, they got to be independent from Congress because Congress would just want to inflate all the time if it was up to them. So you got to have the wise Alan Greenspan to take the punch bowl away when people are getting too buzzed, right? Except he never does that. He just pours straight tequila in the thing.
Well, that's what they really do is they come up with new phrases, new theories to just justify whatever it is they want to do. That's what I've
Right.
seen.
Yeah. All right. Now, look, so the thing about all of this is, I mean, first of all, I just think the boom bust cycle is this interesting thing because I've just known it my whole life. In Texas, when I was a kid, I think we talked about this. They built entire neighborhoods worth of streets and curbs and mailboxes and gutters and sewers and then stopped because everything froze and those neighborhoods were never built up for like 10 years. They built the entire Lakeline Mall and all the surrounding thing there in Northwest Austin was all just concrete slabs. And we used to go out there and drink and skateboard and, whatever. But they never built the mall for like a decade because it was this boom bust thing. And, I guess my mom had a friend who owned a bunch of houses who was right in the middle of flipping them all and then got stuck with them all when all of a sudden no one was buying houses anymore. And this is like circa, I don't know what, 1983 or 4 or 6 or something. I don't know. When I was a kid. And then, so I've seen this happen over and over again, of course, with the crash of 88. And then there was the recession of the Gulf War era, Iraq War One. And then there was, of course, the famous crash of the dot-coms and then '08 and whatever that keeps happening. But then that's all caused by inflation. And that's this huge key I want to beat everybody over the head with. But then all along through all of that is also just the endlessly rising prices. And on the margin, right, you're an economist of sorts, in practice, an investor, but like on the margin, this kills people. The endless increase in prices, where this is like whether people can afford to eat healthy food or not, or afford medicine for their kids or not, afford the rent for their apartment that just went up or not. And, of course, it's the poorest people who work for, hourly wages who are the last ones to get a cost of living increase while the cost of living is increasing, And so it really sucks for people, man. You got people living outside. I know there are a lot of people who like being homeless or are just drunks or whatever, but there are a lot of people also who are just screwed and just cannot afford to, they were on the margin. Now they're off of it. That's what I'm trying to say, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, where I live, I mean, there's home since 2020. I see homeless people, and I never saw them before 2020 in this town I live in. But I would say that while what you're saying is true over the course of all these decades, has been a slow inflation compared to what's happened over the past couple of years, and I don't think I certainly have not experienced anything like what happened since 2020. And I'll go back to the 1970s because I was born in 1975, but I had no memory. And there was a movie that came out in 1972 or three called Soylent Green. Okay.
Oh, hell yeah.
And it was 1973. And what's funny about, I never seen the movie, and then I watched it a couple years ago. And in the movie, basically the story is so much inflation and so little food that everyone is starving to death. And that's the main point of the movie. What's funny though is I went and looked at the history of what was going on back then. And there was inflation really starting in 1967, um, but it wasn't that big. It was like 5% a year. Then it would go back of CPI, consumer price inflation. Then it would go back down, and it was going up and down, linked to this interest rate cycle and the elections and the stock market. But then in 1973, the inflation. I mean, I don't know. I guess it was a coincidence, but just as this movie came out, the prices exploded in 30 days, where grocery store prices went up like 20% in a couple of weeks. And that hadn't happened until 1973. And that's kind of what we've experienced in the past couple of years, where the prices would jump in a very short amount of time. And then that price movement would slow down as it is right now. It's not really going up crazy, but if you look, there's been like two periods where prices just jump in the past 2 years at the grocery store, in like 6 weeks. And what's funny about it is, you don't always notice it until later. So for example, a couple weeks ago, I don't really eat potato chips, but I was going somewhere on a trip with some people, and I was in the grocery store, and I said, well, I'm going to go buy a bag of potato chips. And I hadn't probably bought a bag of potato chips in a couple years. And I go buy this bag of potato chips. I'm like, my God, it's $5. So that's what kind of happens. You just get shocked by how much items cost if you don't, you're not regular buying them. I mean, pizzas are, how much, just everything is just going up.
Yeah, no, I know. It's completely crazy. Hey, y'all, let me tell you about Robertson Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Nobody trusts the U.S. dollar anymore. Foreign governments are stocking up on gold instead of $100 bills. One, they know they need to, and two, that means you need to too. Interest rates are up, but for some reason, not much for savings accounts. Park your money there and watch Uncle Joe Biden just counterfeit its value away. You can see how the Fed is afraid to raise rates to beat inflation for fear of popping the current bubbles, at least before the election. So more inflation it will continue to be. Gold is your shield against monetary and price inflation, just like it always has been. Now, Tim Fry and the guys over at Robertson Roberts are recommending gold over silver, since the world's almost 200 governments are putting their own pressure on the price, which should help everyone else who makes similar calls on their own. Of course, Robertson Roberts can help you with platinum, palladium, and silver, as well as gold. Don't let the Fed and the war party inflate all your savings away. Look up Robertson Roberts at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. Hey, y'all, you should sign up for my Substack. It's scotthortonshow.substack.com. And if you do that, you'll get the interviews a day before everybody else. But not only that, they'll be free of commercials. How do you like that? Pretty good, huh? scotthortonshow.substack.com. Hey, y'all, libertasbella.com is where you get Scott Horton Show and Libertarian Institute shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, and stickers and things, including the great Top Lobsters designs as well. See, that way it says on your shirt why you're so smart. Libertas Bella, from the same great folks who bring you ammo.com for all your ammunition needs, too. That's libertasbella.com. Hey, y'all got kids or nephews or anything? You know about the Tuttle Twins books, right? Libertarian lessons about life, liberty, truth, and the state. It's really great stuff. And hey, did you guys know I'm a Tuttle Twin? I'm a character in their world now. Skater Scott, local vert dog and anti-government know-it-all. They introduced me in a short book last year, and I hear they're going to develop my character's story a bit more in the future. Cool, right? Anyway, they're now celebrating 10 years and having sold millions of these books. And now they're giving away a free magazine at TuttleTwins.com/10years. There's no shipping charge, and they're not going to ask for your credit card. It's just a free magazine. The gimmick is that inside the magazine, they've got a really great deal to get all the books. The best deal they've ever offered, which you will certainly want to take them up on. So go to TuttleTwins.com/10years for your free magazine, and someday, hopefully soon, you and your kids will be reading all about the libertarian antics of cartoon me, along with all my new pals. That's TuttleTwins.com/10years. You know, especially just the grocery bill, but everything too. I told my landlord, forget it, dude. You're not raising my rent. So just take that back because I can't do it. You're just going to have to suck up the difference this time. You know what I mean?
Now,
And a huge part of that is property taxes too. They know that prices are highly inflated, but they still come and raise property taxes through the roof on people, man. So my poor landlord, like, you know, he's a decent guy and his margins are razor thin and he might not have a margin at all. He's just holding on to his house for later, hopefully, or something, because I'm not paying him anymore and he doesn't want to kick me out. So, but it's a standoff, man. He wants to raise my rent.
Man.
He kind of has to, you know?
Well, one bad thing about inflation, and a couple years ago, I read. Well, I've tried to find some books about the history of inflation, and I couldn't find any. Nothing that was recently written. I found like two books. They're both written in the 1970s or 1980 or something, when inflation, had been going on for a long time. But anyway, both of them, one of them had case studies of there had been actually high periods of inflation in the United States, like around the Civil War and the American Revolution and so forth, and in Germany before in the 1920s, is
not worth
is
a
what people always
continental.
refer to. But
I learned about that in school. Not worth a continental, they would say about the dollars during the Revolutionary War.
But one of the troubling things about it is that when there is a lot of inflation, very few people understand that the cause is really the simple fact that more money is being printed by the central banks, and they will blame it on other stuff. Like right now, I've had people at times ask me, and I see the Democrats put this out, that it's being caused by corporations trying to gouge people. And that's the cause of inflation. In fact, I think Biden has said that a couple of times. But there'll be other things, foreigners are causing it, or they're just different scapegoat groups. Like in Germany, they were blamed they blamed it on Jewish people. They blamed it on farmers. They're saying that farmers were hoarding their food and not bringing it to the cities to sell it, to force the prices up. People just will blame it on all kinds of things, and when in the central cause is the central banks.
Right. And look, I was going to bring this up to you. I was just watching earlier today, essentially every man, in this case a woman, saying that, yeah, there's a new study out that says that the corporations are just making it up. They know that there are COVID era bottlenecks in distribution of some things. And they know that there's been, I think she may have mentioned some money printing or maybe not, but like they know that there are these economic factors. Then they use that as an excuse. And then they go ahead and they raise their prices extra beyond what they have to. And so really it's at least like half their fault, even if it's sort of, they have to do it to keep up with all their vendors' prices and everything and labor and whatever, that still they always go extra for their evil extra profits to buy yachts with and stuff. So what about that? Is that true?
Well, I mean, there can be some truth to that when if you look at somewhere like Las Vegas, where you got all these tourists going there and they're spending a lot of money and they can raise the prices up. But then the flip side of that is the cost for all these companies are going up. And there has been a big problem. I mean, it seems to me with just about every business person I talk with, of hiring people. And so they got to increase people's pay. And I think that's a bigger factor than a company just raising prices, because that can be risky too. If you keep raising the prices, at some point, people will stop spending the money to pay those prices.
Yeah. That makes sense when they got nowhere else to go, like you're the local electricity monopoly or whatever, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
All right. Well, So now, I mean, but this is the whole point here is you're saying when we get to this magic number of the debt to GDP ratio thing here, at some point, the iron laws of the universe kick in and start beating the American people's ass for the trouble our government has got us in. And at that point, what? They have to inflate away the debt by turning the money machine on full blast. And then, so that means, is that right? And that means what for people listening? What do they need to do to protect their neck?
Yeah, that's basically what happens when you get to that, I guess, pivot point is that the bond market, because people own government bonds, they start to worry about this in, the coming inflation and, is my interest on these bonds a good price that I paid? And they'll start to sell the bonds slowly. I'm not saying the bonds just crash or something, but the bond market actually tends to move very slow. And when the bonds go down in value, the interest yields on them go up, which that hurts the economy and hurts the stock market. And the Fed most likely would actually lower interest rates, even if inflation is coming at this point, and just say, okay, this is just going to be what it is for the next couple of years, and we're just going to have to inflate these debts away and go through this. This is what's going on for, as I mentioned before, in Turkey the past couple of years. This is just the way things happen. Now,
But if somebody wants to save themselves by, say, buying some land, because that'll appreciate, that still means they got to be able to keep up with the property taxes, right? As we were talking about, and that kind of thing. So you have people.
oh yeah, how do you? Yeah, so yeah. Well, I mean, I would say, if you want to take advantage of it, and I'm not doing this when I say this, but yeah, investing in land would be a good way to do it if you can lock it in at the current, interest rate. But I'm just doing it by owning gold and silver. What I've figured looking at this stuff is that gold and silver will go up about twice as much what the dollar will fall in value. So if I just put a portion of my money or assets into that, then I'm not really, I assume my gold and silver will go up more than the dollar will fall in value and be fine. But one thing too, I want to tell you, so earlier this year, this specific thing about the debt to GDP, it got over 120%. Now it's 122 and some change. When it got to 120, that's when I started to get concerned about it and went back and looked at these books that I got and so forth. And I happened to go to a local political meeting where our Republican congressman, he was there, and some Republican that was running for the Senate was there, and they both spoke, and the congressman talked about this issue. And then the guy that's running for office, his background is he's a staffer for some other Republican congressman, and it's been doing that for 15 years or something. And when they were done speaking, I talked to them one-on-one, and I told them I'm worried about this debt to GDP thing. And I said, I just saw it went to 120%. And I asked them, how fast is it growing? And they told me that they don't know, that the Congressional Budget Office has projections, but they've been wrong, and it's growing faster than they project.
Yeah.
So as soon as I heard that, I went home, and the next day I bought more gold and silver.
Man. And then, so what do? Just bury it in the yard? I mean, don't tell me which corner of the yard, but like you buy certificates in companies that mine this stuff, or what do you do?
Well, you can buy. I have some physical gold and silver, and I just have it in the bank, safety deposit box. But yeah, you can buy, and I do too. This too. You can buy funds that are on the stock market, exchange traded funds that own gold and silver, and I do have individual mining stocks, but they're more volatile, and I don't necessarily recommend everyone go buy mining stocks.
I see. And so this is what you're telling your people because you're an advice giver on this, right? Like you tell, or at least you show people, hey, here's what I'm doing, and this is what you're doing. You're just buying metals right now because the storm's coming.
Yeah, yeah. I got about a third of my money in gold and silver exchange traded funds. That's all. They just hold physical gold and silver. That's it.
And now, would you say like in typical good times, if there was such a thing like midway through on the bubble or whatever, that like you would have 10% and now you're extra high up at 30, or you always tend to keep it that high?
No, this is the highest I've ever had it. I had about 14%, let's say in February. So I've increased it, but I've traded it and owned it in the past. I mean, probably more than anything else, I've traded gold and silver, but this is a little the time we're in now, I think is a little different. And it
now
tends
right
to be
here
less.
we pause for an ad for our RBI gold and silver brokers.
Oh, great.
There you go. Connor,
But
insert ad here. All right, now back to the show.
well, one thing I'll say, about gold, it tends to be less volatile than the stock market. So, for example, in 2020, the S&P 500 fell over 30%. It's like 33%, and gold fell half as much, and then came back quicker than the stock market did. Now, one thing that's happened with people, younger people, I'll say, in the markets that started trading in 2020 or so, I'll tell people what I'm doing. I mean, I'm talking like at a bar or something, right? And people have in their mind that it's not just young people. I went to a doctor's checkup, and I had the same sort of conversation, and they got in their mind that gold doesn't move much and it's safe. So it's something like rich people buy in order to protect their money, but they're not interested in it because they want to make a lot of money. And gold doesn't go up enough, so it's not going to make them a killing. And
That's what I
that's
thought.
pretty much a misperception that's just been created by what's been going on in the markets the past couple of years.
Well, I guess the idea kind of is that the governments and the central banks always are deliberately suppressing the price of gold because they have so much control over the price, and they artificially use smoke and mirrors and bubblegum and string to keep it from reflecting how bad their currencies really should be doing.
Well, I don't know. I'm not. I'm a little. I don't think they have that much control over the price. And something interesting has happened actually the past couple months. So the past couple years, the biggest buyer of gold in the whole world has been the Chinese central bank. So they've been accumulating gold every single month. And then in May, they didn't do it. They didn't buy any more gold. And the price dropped 100 points when that news came out. And then it stabilized, and now it's gone back up. And then just last week, they issued a statement saying, we didn't buy any gold last month either. So for like 18 months in a row, they were buying gold. And then the last 2 months, they didn't buy any. And so that's sort of maybe a manipulation where they want they want to put out these statements to keep it from going up so they can buy more or something. But I don't really think the U.S. government is putting a lot of effort into preventing gold from going up. I mean, it's gone up for the past 20 years, and I don't think people really care that much if it goes up or down. Like, I don't think many people even pay attention to it. And like gold going up makes them think, oh, everything's going to go under or something.
Yeah.
Just don't think people even nowadays they are so obsessed with what the U.S. stock market's doing or Bitcoin's doing or many other things.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're saying it is a great insurance policy, but also you can make money trading it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And silver tends to move, with gold, but just is more volatile.
Mm-hmm.
Goes up more when gold goes up, goes down more
Well, I
when
know
gold goes
from
down.
Dr. Paul, the greatest American who ever lived, he had a deal with his partner, the doctor, when he was an obstetrician, that they would take all their money that they earned, at the end of the year. They would pay all their employees and pay their offices, property taxes, and all those things, settle up all their bills. And then whatever money they had left at the end of the year, they would half it. And then they both just did this. I don't know if it was agreement with each other, but they both then would put all that money in gold, because it was like their extra profit beyond their salaries that they were paying themselves for being a doctor. You know what I mean? It's like the extra profit for the firm at the end of the year. And they would put all that in gold. And so that was how he built his retirement savings, was doing that. And so not that he's a billionaire, but he's certainly a millionaire and is not dependent on anyone to take care of him because he was squirreling away gold all that time. AU.
Wow, that's interesting. I never knew that. That's a neat story.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
I know someone who's done that with silver, and they're in their 70s. It's just like
It's sort of like that Jay Leno thing where he said he always has two jobs and he always spends money from one job and saves all the money from the other job his whole life. He's always done that. And so like, even like he takes his money from touring, but he takes all of his Tonight Show money. He took all of his Tonight Show money and saved it. And then so even all those cars didn't come from Tonight Show money. They came from touring and stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So same kind of deal, only in this case with gold. Just that level of discipline that like all the money I get from this always goes straight into savings on this one shiny thing, Paid off very well for him. And that's beginning, that was from back in the 60s. So.
Yeah, that adds up.
Yeah. He tells a story of how he knew better when Nixon took us off the gold standard, that he was like, oh no, because he'd already read all the Misesians and knew.
Well,
and in fact, he had agreed with Mises that Bretton Woods, the partial gold standard, couldn't last because the way it was structured, that it was going to fail. And here was the Misesians' prediction coming true. And therefore, he was more of an Austrian than ever then, I guess,
Well, another argument, about like I talk about China buying gold up is if you look at the Bretton Woods agreement that was created after World War II and it lasted to 72. And now, the US dollar has been the reserve currency of the world. And people talk about, oh, it's going to lose that status one day. But it slowly is, and that's a process that is unlikely just to be like a collapse overnight or something. The British pound didn't lose its status overnight. It took like 30 years. And it's more that it just gets less slowly used in the global economy than it has. I think I don't have the figures right in front of me, but it's probably within the last 20 years is if you look at all the world transactions and what currency they're in, probably it's 10% less now in the U.S. dollar than it was. And actually the pound is still one of the biggest currencies in the world. So I'm just trying to suggest that there are geopolitical reasons for gold to be going up, or for people around the world to be buying it. If you look at what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. basically cut them out of using U.S. dollars. It froze their reserves that they held in treasuries, and every other country in the world saw that and now can't feel like dollars are safe reserves if they have a reason to think they may come into conflict with the United States, which Iran could, even Saudi Arabia, China could. It's just an endless list of countries. And you don't know, it could be Brazil. They could have a change of government the United States decides it doesn't like, just as happened in
64
Bolivia.
Yeah. All right, listen, I'm so sorry, man. I'm out of time. I got to edit this show for the LA show this afternoon, and clock is just killing me today. So I got to cut it short, but thank you for coming back on the show.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
been great to talk to you. I always learn so much.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.